There's a question living inside you. You've never spoken it aloud. Maybe you've never even let yourself think it fully. But it's there waiting in the space between your thoughts. In the pause, before you fall asleep. In the moment when you're alone and the noise finally stops. You know the feeling. That subtle pressure in your chest when you're sitting in a room full of people. But you feel like you're watching your life through glass. Everyone's talking, laughing, moving through their days with what looks like certainty. And you're nodding along, playing the part. But inside there's this question circling like a bird that won't land. It's not about what you'll have for dinner or which path your career should take. It's deeper than that. More fundamental. The kind of question that, if you let yourself really look at it, might unravel everything you've built. So you don't ask it. You keep yourself busy instead. You scroll, you work, you plan, you worry about smaller things that feel manageable, things that have answers. Because the real question, the one you're afraid to ask, it doesn't promise an easy answer. It promises change. And change feels like falling when you can't see the ground. Here's what most people don't tell you. The questions we're most afraid to ask are the ones we've already answered in our hearts. We just haven't had the courage to listen yet. Think about it. When was the last time you sat in complete stillness, not watching something, not listening to something, not thinking about what comes next, just being with yourself? And in that rare moment of silence, what rose to the surface? Maybe it was, am I living the life I actually want, or the life I think I'm supposed to want? Maybe it was, do I even know who I am when no one's watching? Maybe it was, what if everything I've been chasing doesn't matter? These questions terrify us because they challenge the story we've been telling ourselves. The story that says if we just work hard enough, achieve enough, become enough, we'll finally feel okay. We'll finally feel whole. We'll finally feel like we've arrived. But you've tasted enough of life by now to know the truth, haven't you? Every arrival is temporary. Every achievement leaves you asking, is this it? Every milestone reached reveals another horizon, another mountain, another version of yourself you haven't yet become. And somewhere in the middle of all that striving, all that becoming, all that trying to prove something to someone, yourself, your parents, the world, you lost touch with the question that matters most. Not what should I do, but who am I without the doing? Not what do I want to achieve, but what do I want to feel? Not how do I become enough, but what if I already am? The Sufi poet Rumi wrote, why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? And this is the prison we build for ourselves, not made of bars, but of unasked questions, not made of chains, but of the fear that if we truly looked at our lives with honest eyes, we might have to change them. We're so afraid of our own truth that we'd rather live in comfortable confusion than liberating clarity. But here's the paradox. The question you're afraid to ask is also the doorway to your freedom. It's the crack where the light gets in. It's the loosening of the grip you've had on a version of yourself that was never really you. You see, most of us spend our lives answering questions other people gave us. Questions like, are you successful? Are you productive? Are you enough? Are you keeping up? We internalize these voices until they become our own. Until we can't tell the difference between what we actually want and what we've been taught to want. And then one day, usually when we least expect it, in the middle of the night, or driving home from work, or standing in the shower, the real question surfaces. The one we've been avoiding. The one that's been waiting patiently beneath all the noise. And when it does, we have a choice. We can push it back down. We can turn up the volume on our lives. We can fill the space with more work, more distraction, more of the same patterns that got us here. We can tell ourselves we'll deal with it later, when things are less busy, when we have more time, when the conditions are right, or we can do something radical. We can stop. We can breathe. We can turn toward the question instead of away from it. Not to find an immediate answer, but simply to acknowledge what's true. To say, yes, I feel this. Yes, this question is here. Yes, I'm afraid of what it might mean. Because here's what happens when you finally ask the question you've been avoiding. You stop fragmenting yourself. You stop splitting your energy between the life you're living and the one you're pretending to live. You stop performing for an invisible audience and start showing up as the person you actually are. This doesn't mean everything suddenly becomes clear. The path doesn't illuminate all at once, but something shifts. The weight you've been carrying, the weight of pretending, of avoiding, of not being honest with yourself, it begins to lift. And in that lightness, you remember something you forgot a long time ago. You're allowed to question everything. You're allowed to not have it all figured out. You're allowed to admit that the life you built might not be the life you want. You're allowed to ask the question. Let's talk about why we avoid asking the real questions. Because it's not random. It's not weakness. It's a survival mechanism we've perfected since childhood. You learned early that certain questions weren't welcome. When you asked why too many times, you were told to stop asking. When you questioned the path laid out for you, you were called ungrateful. When you expressed doubt about the beliefs you inherited, you were made to feel like something was wrong with you. So you learned to be quiet. You learned to follow the script. You learned that belonging meant not rocking the boat, not questioning too deeply, not wanting something different than what everyone else seemed to want. And the architecture of avoidance was built brick by brick until you had a fortress around your most authentic questions. A fortress that kept others out, yes, but also kept you locked in. Alan Watts once said, "The menu is not the meal." We've spent so much time studying the menu of life, what we're supposed to want, supposed to be, supposed to achieve, that we forgot to actually taste our experience. We forgot to ask, does this nourish me? Does this feel true? Think about your daily life. How much of it is guided by genuine desire, and how much is guided by should? I should check my email. I should be more productive. I should want this relationship to work. I should be grateful for what I have. I should know what I'm doing by now. The word should is the language of avoidance. It's how we silence the real question beneath it, which is usually, is this what I actually want? And that question is terrifying because it requires you to take responsibility for your life. Not responsibility in the guilt-ridden, self-blaming sense, but responsibility in its truest meaning, the ability to respond. The ability to say, this is my life, and I get to choose how I meet it. When you avoid the question, you stay in reaction mode. You're always responding to external pressures what your family expects, what society values, what your past self decided. You're living from the outside in, letting the world tell you who to be. But when you ask the question, when you really ask it, you begin to live from the inside out. You start to feel your way through your choices rather than think your way through them. You start to notice the difference between the path you're on and the path that's actually calling you. This is where the ego gets uncomfortable, because the ego's job is to keep you safe, and safe means predictable. Safe means staying with what you know, even if what you know is slowly suffocating you. The ego would rather have you be miserable in a familiar way than joyful in an unknown way. So it builds elaborate defense mechanisms. It distracts you with endless tasks. It convinces you that now is not the right time. It tells you that asking the question means you're ungrateful, selfish, knave, irresponsible. It shows you all the people who depend on you staying exactly as you are. And for a while, this works. You go back to sleep. You put the question on hold. You tell yourself you'll revisit it when things settle down. But here's what the ego doesn't tell you. The question doesn't disappear. It waits. It grows. It starts showing up in your body in tension, in exhaustion, in the vague sense that something is off even when everything looks fine on the surface. It shows up in your dreams, in your sudden bursts of emotion, in the moments when you catch yourself staring into space, feeling the weight of a life half lived. The question you're afraid to ask isn't your enemy, it's your ally. It's the part of you that refuses to settle. The part that knows you're capable of more honesty, more depth, more aliveness than you're currently allowing yourself. In Zen, they speak of the great doubt, the profound questioning that precedes awakening. Not doubt as skepticism or cynicism, but doubt as openness, the willingness to not know. The courage to question the very ground you're standing on. This kind of doubt isn't a crisis, it's a doorway. But we've been taught to fear uncertainty. We've been taught that not having answers means something is wrong with us. We've been taught to cling to beliefs, identities, and paths even when they no longer fit, because at least they're familiar. So we carry on, wearing masks we forgot we put on, playing roles we never auditioned for, living according to rules we never agreed to. And all the while, the question sits in the corner of our consciousness, patient and persistent. Is this really my life? Or is this the life I accepted because I was too afraid to ask for what I actually wanted? Here's the truth that no one prepares you for. Asking the question is not the end of your life as you know it. It's the beginning of your life as it could be. Yes, it might change things. Yes, it might require you to disappoint people. Yes, it might mean walking away from situations that looked good on paper but felt empty in your heart. But what's the alternative? To arrive at the end of your one precious life and realize you spent it answering everyone else's questions but your own. To look back and see that you had the chance to be honest, to be brave, to be fully yourself, and you chose comfort instead. The poet Mary Oliver asked, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" This is not a rhetorical question. This is the question, and it requires you to ask the smaller, scarier questions first. What am I avoiding? What truth am I not ready to face? What would I do if I weren't afraid? Who would I be if I stopped performing? These questions don't have easy answers, but they have honest ones, and honest answers are what transform lives. So how do you actually do this? How do you ask the question you've been avoiding without falling apart? How do you face your truth without losing yourself in the process? The answer is simpler than you think, but it requires something our culture doesn't value: stillness. Not the stillness of meditation apps or weekend retreats, though those can help. I'm talking about the raw, uncomfortable stillness of sitting with yourself and whatever arises without reaching for a distraction. This is the practice, creating space for the question. Find a moment, any moment. Maybe it's in the morning before the world makes its demands. Maybe it's late at night when everyone else is asleep. Maybe it's during a walk when there's nothing but you and the rhythm of your feet on the ground. In that moment, instead of filling the silence with thoughts, plans, or stories, you simply ask, what am I not allowing myself to feel? And then you wait. Not for an answer to arrive fully formed, but for the truth to surface in whatever way it needs to. Maybe it comes as a feeling in your chest. Maybe it comes as a memory you've been avoiding. Maybe it comes as a quiet knowing that's been there all along. The key is not to judge what comes, not to immediately solve it or fix it or make it more palatable, just to witness it, to say, this is here. This is true for me right now. This is the difference between thinking about your life and actually feeling it. Thinking keeps you at a distance, analyzing, strategizing, protecting. Feeling brings you into direct contact with what's real. And what you'll discover is this: the question you've been afraid to ask loses its power when you finally give it space to exist. Not because it goes away, but because you realize you're strong enough to hold it. The Sufis have a beautiful teaching. Before you die. It sounds morbid, but what they mean is this: let the false self die so the true self can live. Let the version of you built on fear and approval and pretending die so the version built on truth and courage and authenticity can emerge. Asking the honest question is a kind of death. The death of illusions. The death of who you thought you had to be. The death of the comfortable story that's been keeping you small. But on the other side of that death is something remarkable: aliveness. Real, full-bodied, no longer performing aliveness. You start to notice things. The way the light falls through the window. The sound of your own breath. The difference between what you truly want and what you've been conditioned to want. You start to feel connected to your life again instead of just passing through it. Here's a practice you can try: the 3. Question inquiry. First question: what am I pretending not to know? Sit with this. Let it reveal what you've been avoiding. Maybe you're pretending not to know that your relationship isn't working. Maybe you're pretending not to know that your job is draining you. Maybe you're pretending not to know that you're living for other people's approval instead of your own values. Second question: what would I do if I trusted myself completely? Remove the external noise. Remove the fear of judgment. Remove the need to justify or explain. What would you do? Where would you go? Who would you become? Don't censor the answer. Let it be as wild or simple as it needs to be. Third question: what small step can I take today toward that truth? This is where philosophy becomes practice. You don't have to quit your job tomorrow or move across the country or blow up your entire life. You just have to take one honest step. Maybe it's having a difficult conversation. Maybe it's saying no to something you'd usually say yes to. Maybe it's spending an hour doing something that feels true to you, even if it seems impractical. Small steps accumulate, and each step you take toward your truth makes the next step easier. But here's what you need to understand. This journey isn't about reaching some final destination where you have it all figured out. It's about developing a relationship with inquiry itself. It's about becoming someone who can ask hard questions and sit with uncertain answers. Because the question you're afraid to ask today, it's not the last one. Life will keep presenting you with new edges, new growth, new invitations to go deeper. And each time, you'll have the same choice to avoid or engage, hide or reveal, perform or be real. The spiritual path isn't about transcending your humanity. It's about becoming more fully human, more honest, more present, more willing to feel everything that life brings. You know what's beautiful about this? You don't have to be perfect at it. You don't have to ask the question gracefully or bravely every single time. You just have to keep choosing honesty over comfort, truth over pretense, depth over distraction. Some days you'll nail it. You'll feel clear, aligned, awake. Other days you'll slip back into old patterns, old stories, old ways of avoiding. And that's okay. This isn't about perfection. It's about direction. Are you moving toward your truth or away from it? Are you opening or closing? Are you becoming more yourself or less? These are the questions that guide the journey. Not am I there yet, but am I moving? Not have I arrived, but am I showing up? And slowly, over time, you'll notice something shifting. The question you were afraid to ask becomes the question you're grateful you asked. The truth you were avoiding becomes the foundation you build your life on. The uncertainty you feared becomes the space where real growth happens. You realize that you don't need all the answers. You just need the courage to keep asking. Let me tell you what changes when you stop running from the question. First, you stop fragmenting yourself. You know that exhausting feeling of maintaining multiple versions of you, the work you, the family you, the social you, the version you show the world, versus the one who exists when you're alone. When you start living from your honest questions, those fragments begin to integrate. You become one person, not a collection of performances. This doesn't mean you're the same in every context. It means you're operating from the same core truth, regardless of where you are or who you're with. There's a coherence that emerges, a groundedness. You stop feeling like you're constantly trying to remember which mask you're wearing. Second, your relationships change. Some of them deepen in ways you didn't think possible. When you show up honestly, you give other people permission to do the same. The conversations get real. The connection gets real. You stop wasting energy on surface, level interactions, and start investing in the people who can meet you in your truth. But yes, some relationships will end, or transform, or reveal themselves to have been based on who you were pretending to be rather than who you actually are. And this will hurt. Loss always does. But there's a difference between losing something real and losing something that was never quite right in the first place. The people who love the real you, the messy, uncertain, still figuring it out you, those people stay. And the ones who needed you to play a role, they drift away. And that's not failure. That's clarity. Third, you discover that you're more resilient than you thought. The thing you were afraid would destroy you, the question, the truth. The change doesn't destroy you. It strengthens you. Because you learn that you can handle uncertainty. You can handle not knowing. You can handle the discomfort of growth. There's a Zen teaching, the obstacle is the path. The very thing you've been avoiding is the doorway to your liberation. The question you're afraid to ask is the question that will set you free. But freedom doesn't mean everything becomes easy. It means you become capable of meeting your life as it is, not as you wish it would be. Capable of making choices from truth rather than fear. Capable of feeling everything without being destroyed by anything. This is what spiritual maturity looks like. Not having all the answers. Not achieving some permanent state of enlightenment, but developing the capacity to be with what is, ask honest questions, and move toward what's true, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when you can't see the end of the road. Jay Shetty talks about thinking like a monk, and at its core, this means becoming a student of your own life, observing without judging, questioning without needing immediate answers, sitting with paradox, embracing uncertainty. Because here's the deepest truth, you'll never have complete certainty. You'll never have all the answers. You'll never reach a point where growth stops and you can finally relax into knowing. Life is movement. Life is change. Life is constant invitation to go deeper, to ask braver questions, to shed another layer of who you're not so you can remember more of who you are. And the question you're afraid to ask, it's not the end of your seeking. It's the beginning of your awakening. When you ask it, really ask it, with your whole heart you step into a different relationship with existence. You stop trying to control everything and start learning to dance with it. You stop demanding that life make sense and start allowing it to unfold. This is where peace lies. Not in having everything figured out, but in accepting that you don't need to. Not in achieving some final state of perfection, but in being present to each moment as it comes. You start to understand what the mystics have been saying for thousands of years. The answer was never out there. It was always inside you, buried beneath the conditioning, the fear, the noise, waiting for you to get quiet enough to hear it. And when you do hear it, when you finally ask the question and listen to what arises, you realize something profound. You've always known. You've always had access to your own wisdom. You just didn't trust it. You didn't give it space. You didn't value it as much as you valued everyone else's opinions about what your life should look like. But now you do. Now you're learning to trust the quiet voice inside, the one that whispers in the early morning, the one that surfaces when you're brave enough to be still, the one that's been trying to guide you all along. This is the question beneath all questions. Will I trust myself? Will I trust that I know what I need, even if I can't articulate it yet? Will I trust that my longing for something different is valid, even if I can't explain it to anyone else? Will I trust that the discomfort I'm feeling is information, not weakness? When you answer yes to this, when you choose trust over certainty, presence over perfection, truth over comfort, everything shifts. So here's what I want you to know, that question you've been carrying. The one that wakes you up at night? The one that makes you feel like something needs to change, but you don't know what? You're allowed to ask it. You're allowed to not have the answer. You're allowed to be uncertain and still move forward. You're allowed to question everything you've built and discover it wasn't quite right. You're allowed to be human, which means you're allowed to change. The question isn't your enemy. It's your invitation, and you're ready.